Good evening. On the air, the program time. Boris Yeltsin has declined today the federal law adopted by the State Duma the 12th of April on the temporary measures for the political resolution of the crisis in the Chechen Republic. This was reported today by the press service of the head of state of Russia. In the message to the chairman of the Duma, Ivan Rybkin, the president of Russia indicated that this law, instead of achieving political resolution in Chechnya, could have a reverse effect and become an additional destabilizing factor. It's noted in the announcement of the press service. As the Tartas reports, a regiment of Dudaev fighters, around 250 men, attacked last night a post of federal forces near the village Gehi, which is in the Urus-Martan region, 30 kilometers south of Grozny. This was reported today to the journalists by the command of the Unified Contingent of Federal Forces in Chechnya, Colonel General Mikhail Yegorov. The battle, deploying artillery and grenade launchers, according to him, continued for 4 hours. Federal forces lost 2 men killed and 15 injured. The losses are being verified, Yegorov reported. Below is the river Argun. On that bank, the village of Cheriyurt. And beyond it, well visible, are the smokestacks and buildings of the cement plant. There, a large group of gunmen has concentrated. For 3 days, the command of the federal forces was persuading the Dudaev fighters to leave Cheriyurt, not to subject the peaceful residents to danger. Persuasion was to no avail. On the contrary, the gunmen used that time to the full extent and brought in weapons and ammunition. And the elders could not persuade the Dudaev fighters either. And this morning, the federal forces began the liquidation of the unlawful armed group. For several hours, the positions of the gunmen were pounded by aviation and artillery. And later, the tank company opened fire. Only after that, entering the battle was the 7th Battalion of the 7th Air Paratrooper Division. By the end of the day, part of that battalion made the rounds over the gunmen and concentrated on the northern side, and the reconnaissance company blockaded the plant from the opposite side. Today, the installation on the Chechen territory of a separate border commandant's office of the Caucasus Special Border Regiment was completed. Currently, the border troops are located on the fringes of Grozny. Interfax was told by the deputy commander of the headquarters of the border troops of Russia, Lieutenant General Alexander Baranov. The only purpose of establishing a commandant's office, Baranov said, was to protect the part of the Russian-Georgian border within the republic, which stretches for more than 81 kilometers. During these days in Grozny, a little late, the trees are blooming in the Kirov Park, which is beside the former Dudaev Palace and the Ministerial Council building. No one had expected this because almost all of the trees during the combat activities were turned into splinters. But life proceeds along its course, as in Chechnya overall, singed in by the war. This is especially noticeable in Grozny, where restorational work is in full swing, although for now are a mere clearing of rubble. On the streets, the trade is livening up. Throughout, there are posts of Chechen militia and internal affairs forces of the Russian Federation observing compliance with law and order. The situation in the city is completely under control. Shooting during the night hours is very rare and not every night. What is your function here? Our function is to protect the center of the city, the government quarter. What's the interrelationship with the local population? With the local population, our relations are the very best. Together with our federal AMON squads at night on patrol are the local internal affairs squads, and we're maintaining friendly relations. However, the war constantly rears its head even here. At night from the Chechen side, mortar firing of various parts of Grozny is incessant. Each destroyed home or abandoned orchard or any object lying on the road could contain mortal danger. Yesterday, not far from Gudermes on the so-called Stretch Road, a correspondent of Komsomolskaya Pravda, Yelena Luri, happened on a mine. Luckily, the major of the medical services, who was nearby, heard the snap of the detonator of the grenade RDG-5 and threw Lena to the ground, covering her with his own body. As a result, the girl received surface wounds on the chest and hips. Today, she is in the military hospital in the north of Grozny and even smiles. According to the head of the hospital, the condition of the young woman and the officer who saved her causes no apprehension. Tomorrow, Lena will be sent to Moscow. A monument to Russian soldiers who died in Chechnya will be established in the village Kalinka of the Leningrad district. today, the ceremony of laying the first block was held. In December of 1944, from Kamenka to Chechnya, the first group of soldiers and officers of the Leningrad military district were dispatched. During the combat in Chechnya, the 129th Guard Motor Artillery Regiment, stationed in Kamenka, lost 108 soldiers and officers. 3 guards for participants in the operation were honored with the title Hero of Russia, 2 of them posthumously. The 3-day talks between the President of Tajikistan, Emomali Rakhmonov, and the leader of the opposition movement of Islamic Rebirth of Tajikistan, Saeed Abdul Nuri, ended today in the Afghan capital. According to news received in Tehran, the opposition leader gave a positive assessment to the results of the Kabul meeting. As Tehran radio reported, he noted that the sides achieved agreement on restoring national accord in Tajikistan, the return of refugees, and providing for the safety in the region. 2 times, the President Rakhmonov met with the leader of the opposition. During the talks, the intense issues were ceasefire, the return of Tajik refugees home, and the state restructuring of Tajikistan. The President of Tajikistan conversed with the ambassador of Pakistan, the leadership of the Islamic Union of Afghanistan, and in the evening spoke on Afghan radio. Emomali Rakhmonov expressed confidence that the current Kabul meeting and the forthcoming Almaty talks will yield positive results, and finally peace will come to the land of Tajikistan. For now, in Tajikistan, blood continues to flow. During the one pre-dawn hour alone on the right bank micro-region, Khadrent, 2 families were brutally shot. Alexander Kivnev, the deputy director of the headquarters of Civil Defense and Emergency Situations, and the aide of the district military commander, Kazbek Isayev. In all, 5 people were killed and 2 injured. In the opinion of law enforcement organs, the murder is of a political nature and was directed at upsetting the meeting in Kabul and the inter-Tajik talks in Almaty. In order to solve this brutal crime, the best forces from the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and the Prosecutor of the Republic are involved. The official visit to Moscow of the President of Turkmenistan, Saparmurat Niyazov, has come to an end. Today, in the Georgian Hall of the large Kremlin Palace, the triumphant farewell ceremony was held. The main thing which the leaders of Russia and Turkmenia agreed on is strategic partnership and cooperation until the year 2000. Yesterday, Boris Yeltsin and Saparmurat Niyazov signed an agreement on the legal status of Russian citizens who permanently live in Turkmenistan and an agreement on cooperation to ensure rights of the Russian-speaking minority. Apart from that, on the intergovernmental level, several documents were signed, the main of which is an agreement on principles of economic cooperation until the year 2000. Turkmenistan, for now, is the only CIS state with which such agreements have been concluded. Boris Yeltsin signed today a federal law on state benefits to citizens with children, the press service of the head of state reports. The law was adopted by the State Duma the 25th of April of this year and approved by the Federative Council the 4th of May. The President of Russia today in the Kremlin met with a group of young economists, instructors, and postgraduate students of Moscow higher academies, schools, and institutions. Does the President doubt the correctness of the course of economic reforms in Russia, or behind the Kremlin walls has a plan become ripened to expedite or retard the course of these reforms, which will fundamentally change the economic life of the country and our lives in the very near future? To these and other questions, a multitude of Russian journalists wanted answers at an unusual and unexpected, for many, meeting in the Kremlin of the President Boris Yeltsin with a group of young economists, and the response was given in the first phrase. Supposedly, this year, the first phase of economic reform is coming to an end. In the period of economic and financial stabilization will follow. The government has a developed document and program for the years 1995, 96, and 97. That's 3 years. Basically, in compiling it, academicians were consulted. The meeting lasted about an hour without the press, but in the end, Alexander Lifshitz told the press that tomorrow a series of presidential guidelines and instructions on the suggestion of the young economists will begin to be implemented. Optimism regarding the state of the economy in Russia after the meeting was heard in remarks of the participants of the meeting themselves. Currently, evidently, a certain crossroads has come, connected with the emergence, perhaps for now not very steady, but at least signs of stabilization, economic stabilization. And therefore, I think this moment is appropriate, and it's finally imperative at such moments to switch over some of the energies and begin to think in the long-term perspective. But a decision, of course, must be made now. The successful development of the Russian economy, specialists in many ways connect with the broadening of the flow of foreign investments, and this was discussed in Berlin at the Conference of Russian and German Entrepreneurs. The aim of the Business Forum is the presentation of more than 130 investment projects from 25 regions of Russia. Their representatives during the course of 3 days discussed possibilities and the main thing, feasibility of direct contacts according to a scheme, private capital of the FRG, and a concrete Russian company, meeting up to international standards, a plan of manufacturing or financial cooperation. The multilateral accumulation of initiatives, as a rule, are technically intense or containing know-how, an original productivity of Altai mineral water, reprocessing auto tires, and Masters of Russian Art in computer perspective, the latest centers of non-contact corrective vision, popular in Russia cosmetics of joint production, and plasma blood purifiers, and many other things. According to representatives of the Russian State Committee of Property, the FRG in the last 5 years was and is Russia's major trade economic partner, accounting for 17% of our foreign trade turnover. On the other hand, although postponed, but yet a 90 billion foreign debt, unprotected investments, leapfrog with taxes, and overall financial instability. A state of emergency has been declared in the agrarian industrial sector of Kuban, caused by torrential rains which have been coming down in deluge since mid-April. In certain areas, 2 to 3 times the 1-month norm in precipitation falls daily. An alarming situation develops at the largest areas polluted by oil products in the Usinsk part of Komi. During work to burn out the polluted areas, fire flared up here. Yesterday and today, at the fifth section of the lands undergoing liquidation of the oil spill in Usinsk, a fire raged. The fire engulfed almost 12 hectares, and despite the fact that about the need to burn out the polluted areas, much had been spoken about for a long time, the fire was, however, unexpected. Certain observers assert that this is an unfortunate mishap. Others, on the contrary, an organized action. In the Usinsk region, everyone waited for the second flooding period, and today the weather is warm in Komi. In the north, snow is melting near Usinsk, rivers are flowing over their banks. Without an organized fire, the oil-saturated liquid could have ended up in the rivers Kolva, Pechora, and even in the Arctic Ocean. Therefore, extreme measures were undertaken to burn out. However, even this extreme measure could have bordered on disaster. The fire had reached the new recently built oil line, which for now unexplainable reasons lies idle. The protocol for launching it has not been signed. Today the fire was extinguished, but the fire workers and the workers on the polluted areas are left with a multitude of questions. Ivan Rybkin held consultations on the creation of a new electoral bloc with the heads of the Russian Unified Industrial Party. The topic of elections was given priority at the session of the State Duma today. Despite the large number of draft laws which were discussed today by the Duma, the basic topic occupying the deputies were the coming elections. The agrarians and communists suggested the Ministry of Justice be approached with an inquiry whether it's legal to create primary cells of the bloc Our Home is Russia in companies and organizations, headed by Viktor Chernomyrdin. This proposal was supported by arguments that a decree of the president exists banning the creation of primary cells at the place of employment. Duma, in its decision, was unanimous and not just sent an inquiry to the Ministry of Justice, but recommended that the registration of the bloc of Chernomyrdin be suspended. But as the Vice Speaker of the Duma, Mikhail Mitrikov, said, registration of the movement is completed. Absolutely no primary cells created at plant among the staff, or in general there will be no grassroots initiations per se. There will be regional conferences or regional structures of the electoral movement. Ivan Rybkin responded categorically to the question of suspending registration. My opinion is such that the decree of the President from the 14th of June 1991 hasn't been abolished by anyone. Evidently, the situation began to become clear with the second bloc to be headed by Ivan Rybkin. The social political movement, Accord, has been filed, and I was approached to head this social political movement. I presume that I still have time to think. As is known, Ivan Rybkin has a lot to think about because the Speaker is a member of the leadership of the Agrarian Party, also claiming that it will have its own bloc and counts on Rybkin's authority. And later, with assessment of the latter with assessments of the Agrarian was more than restrained. Regarding the electoral amalgamation, the Agrarian Party of Russia, I'm deeply convinced that that electoral amalgamation has the right to live. The deputies stated today that they were inspired by results of the referendum in Belarus and noted the special role of the Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. Heartened by the results of the voting in a neighboring state, parliamentarians supported their colleague Sergei Baburin, who suggested in December of this year a pan-Russian referendum be held on the question of integration of Russia and Belarus. But adopting such a decision, the Duma simultaneously didn't ratify the law on the referendum. The document was sent for fine-tuning. On the backdrop of these serious political decisions and statements, as usual, Deputy Marachev stood out, evidently also in the pre-election campaign, but uniquely and with his own efforts. Today is the day of the Pioneer Organization in the name of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Unfortunately, the Pioneer Republic was dispersed, yet I want to place in the agenda the question that is the message from the Duma deputies to boys and girls that they should complete the academic year with straight A's. Unlike previous statements of Marachev, this time he was supported by the colleagues and they adopted the message to the pupils on the end of the academic year. The questions of the gradual rebirth of Russian Cossacks were examined today in Moscow by the Council on Cossack Matters under the President of the Russian Federation. The Russian Cossacks are beginning to enjoy a rebirth and today are a definite force. The problem of Cossackdom, especially in the advent of elections of the State Duma, suddenly has stirred up the most varied political circles. And currently, literally, a battle is unfolding for influence on the Cossack movement in order to receive their votes. The Council, under the President of Russian Cossack Affairs, at today's meeting examined the question of holding a pan-Russian unifying Cossack circle and discussed the concept of engaging the Cossacks in civil service based on historical tradition of the Cossacks and contemporary needs of the nation. However, the realization of the Cossacks striving to serve the homeland is impeded by the absence of a legislative mechanism, although even now ready to take the Cossacks into their ranks are the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Internal Affairs, the Federal Border Service, and the Ministry of Emergency Situations. Here, the question arises, to whom will the Cossack units be subordinate? To the law and the President. The current goal of the Council on Cossacks Affairs under the President is to expand the formal legislative basis and put into effect the State Register of Cossack Communities. Such a register, signed by the President, will hit those who play the Cossack card without any relation to the Cossacks at all. It even happens that penetrating Cossack circles are individuals who represent not Cossacks, but commercial structures, political financial groups, and shadow criminal business, which initially creates schism and breeds mistrust and casts a shadow on the entire state policy vis-à-vis the Cossacks. At the regular meeting of the Security Council of Russia, which Interfax learned is planned to be held the 24th of May, there they will examine the question of Russian Cossacks. Today, the Presidium of the State Commission on the Affairs of Compatriots defined the first 6 recipients of financial support in the Russian diaspora in the near abroad. Money has been allocated to hire instructors for the Russian-speaking schools in the CIS and Baltic states, summer vacation for children from needy families, and also to conduct historical, architectural, and cultural functions. The Commission plans to create a federal fund of support for compatriots and to prevent the departure from the screens of the near abroad of Channel 1 Russian television. And although 10 billion rubles allocated from the budget are least inspiring for the grandiose projects, the Vice Premier Sergei Shakrai feels criticism of the government is unjust for the absence of a concept of support to the Russian-speaking population. The document was formulated in last year's decree of the President on support for the compatriots. There are 2 strategic goals. One is to help our compatriots to continue to live, grow, and create economic well-being there where they live. And the second strategic line is, in any case, Russians must know that upon returning to Russia, they will be received in Russia as our own people. I'm certain that in the near future, a state program will be ratified, which is called by the conditional name, the Great Resettlement. The idea is to create economic conditions so that employable population would move to the south of Siberia, to the Far East, where there are conducive climatic conditions and free land. The trial of Alexei Vidyankin, who's charged with threatening to murder deputies of the Duma Sergei Yushchenkov and Sergei Kovalov, which began today, was not continued. With details, our correspondent Ivan Pankov. The 30-year-old Alexei Vidyankin, as is known, made threats on the program of Russian television, and the prosecutor of Moscow filed criminal charges against him. However, in the beginning of the proceedings, to the question of the judge, are there any objections regarding the members of the jury, Alexei Vidyankin made this statement. In it says that he could not agree to his case being examined here because he knows one of the judges personally and worked together with him in the organs of protecting social order. Despite the objections of the prosecutor, the court, after a half-hour break, satisfied the petition of Vidyankin, and his case will now be tried by the Moscow City Court. We'll note that the victims, Sergei Yushchenkov and Sergei Kovalov, did not bother to come to the trial. Viktor Chernomyrdin today ended his official visit to Bulgaria. The second day of the visit of Viktor Chernomyrdin to Bulgaria was more of a protocol nature. The basic agreements were achieved yesterday. Today, details were fine-tuned. The Prime Minister began his work by visiting the plant Balkan-Kar. This plant is a typical result of the collapse of the Soviet economic network, a base company of which it was. On the other hand, an example of ardent desire to restore the severed ties. At that time, 50,000 forklifts were produced here, 20 of which were delivered to the USSR. Currently, the entire holding yields not more than 4,000, and the base cost of the forklift, which is at approximately 50% of the average European price, in crossing our border, 1/3 more is added, and for such a price there are no buyers. At the meeting in the administration, they discussed the building of an assembly facility in our country, which would help to significantly reduce the price of the finished product. After a brief meeting with the chairman of the National Assembly and along the road to the residence, the Prime Minister happened to stop at the Russian Church of St. Nicholas the Wonder Worker. Before 1917 and from 1994, the cathedral is the church at the Russian Embassy and the residence of the Moscow Patriarchate. For the first time, it's an intimate matter. Those present saw how the Prime Minister lit candles for his family. At the meeting of Viktor Chernomyrdin with the President, Zhelo, the line of cooperation was confirmed, which, as was stated, does not contradict the strivings of the two countries in rapprochement with European structures. They touched also on matters of entering NATO. Assessing the situation, the Prime Minister noted that there exists at least two reasons to wait. First of all, the new concept of NATO is not yet clear who is the enemy, and secondly, the joining to the bloc will demand changes in the caliber of weapons, and that is expensive, and also it's a question of whose is better. The official visit was ended with the signing of joint documents on the level of Prime Ministers, a declaration of the development of economic cooperation. In all, 14 agreements were reached, specifically such major ones as the agreement in the field of energy, cooperation in the medical industry, and international shipments. From Sofia, the Russian premier will leave for Van, where he will spend Saturday. In Gdansk, today the session of the Council of the Baltic Sea States convened. Among the basic questions in the agenda, development of political and economic, cooperation of the countries of the region, questions of observing human rights and environmental problems. A souvenir photograph, the ministers of foreign affairs of the republics and kingdoms, which are within the Baltic Council, the highest origin of regional cooperation, before the beginning of their fourth session. In Gdansk, which received the heads of the diplomatic departments of 10 countries of the Baltic community, was once in the Ganzeysk Union, which united the seaside cities of the Baltic region. This was a type of republic of free merchants, tradesmen, and seafarers. But that distant cooperation is the entire extent of the experience of the interaction of Baltic states. In the opinion of Andrei Kozyrev, even the Baltic Council, the talk of cooperation is still more than cooperation itself. As an example of what remains still on paper, he cited several projects important for the entire region, affecting St. Petersburg and Kaliningrad. Welcoming the creation of the Institute of the Commissioner of the Council on Human Rights, the minister noted that a serious, disconcerting state of affairs continues with the civil rights of the Russian-speaking population of Latvia and Estonia. The ministers noted several measures which, in their opinion, could turn the Council into a truly functioning mechanism of Baltic cooperation. The memorandum on mutual understanding between the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation and the Korean Republic on military contacts was signed today in Seoul by the Minister of Defense Pavel Grachov and his Southern Korean counterpart, Lee An-ho. The document provides for a two-sided exchange of military delegations. The Russian Minister of Defense arrived in Seoul on a three-day official visit. In Bosnia, a tense situation remains. The state army is launching its assault on various fronts. Muslim forces continue to attack positions of Bosnian Serbs in the most vulnerable points. In the west, near Bihać, in the north, near the Pasavinsk corridor, connecting the Serb lands. In the east, in the suburbs of Sarajevo. In the Bosnian capital proper, sniper and artillery crossfire don't cease. As the commander of the government armed forces, the General Rasim Delic, announced the Bosnian army has become a force capable of freeing the country. The threat of war unavoidably approaches, and in these conditions, finding themselves in the squeeze are the UN peacekeeping forces. Each day, the number of injured and dead increases. Sad, among them, there are our compatriots as well. In the last 3 days of the 5 injured peacekeepers, there were 4 Russians. And overall, during the time of the peacekeeping operation in Bosnia, there, 162 died, and more than 1,400 UN soldiers and officers have been injured. It's clear that such statistics don't generate joy, and therefore currently there's active discussion of the question of changing the status of the peacekeepers and the relocation of the blue helmets, and this mostly affects the French and British battalions. It's noteworthy that as soon as the situation began to heat up in Bosnia, Muslim countries supporting the Bosnian leadership became more active. In Erbat last night, a meeting began of the so-called Parallel Contact Group of the Organization of the Islamic Conference, which welcomed the heroic resistance of the Bosnian people to the Serb aggression. Willingness to replace the French and British peacekeepers in Bosnia was announced by Turkey and Pakistan. What this could lead to is evident. It's not by chance that the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Great Britain, Douglas Hurd, responded to this proposal with a categorical refusal. According to the last reports, the situation in the Bosnian capital is gradually normalizing. UN representatives are holding separate talks with the Muslim and Serb authorities. Correspondent Vitor Tas was told in the Sarajevo headquarters of the peacekeeping forces. In the framework of those talks, the head of the civil service of the UN in Bosnia-Herzegovina, Dejan Mihov, in Palić is meeting with the vice president of the Serb Republic, Nikola Kolavic. In Kuala Lumpur today, talks resumed between the United States and North Korea on the nuclear problem on the Korean peninsula. The previous round ended in stalemate. Pyongyang didn't accept the suggestion of the Americans to close down the nuclear program in exchange for free supply of 2 nuclear reactors from South Korea. The diplomats of North Korea said that South Korean reactors don't comply with their accepted safety norms. A fierce clash between police and terrorists occurred in Karachi. The police and the army units engaged weapons during the operation against one of the terrorist groups. As a result of the clash, 1 Pakistani military was killed, 2 civilians, and 23 people were injured. In Zaire's capital, Kinshasa, the problem of food has become acute. However, authorities won't allow hundreds of trucks with food to enter the city who have come from areas gripped by the Ebola epidemic. According to official reports, already 117 people are infected with the deadly virus. In London, British authorities have hospitalized 3 Zairians who are being tested for the Ebola virus. They arrived in Heathrow Airport on a flight from Moscow with false documents. Tomorrow, according to the blood analysis results, they will specifically establish whether they're carriers of the virus. In the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Great Britain, a correspondent Vitor Tas was told that they are prepared to examine the matter of providing Russian authorities with information about these Zairians if Moscow requests this from the British government. From the 22nd of May, in all Moscow airports, a medical monitoring of Zairean citizens will be carried out who arrive in the capital of Russia. This was stated by the head of the Moscow Center of Sanitary Epidemic Control, Nikolai Filatov. The arrested head of the cult owns in Ryukyo, Sioko Sahara, refuses to make any depositions. This was said to a correspondent of Vitor Tas today by sources within the Japanese police. Meanwhile, the police could actually be forced to release the suspect of the entire chain of crimes, the head of the cult, if the investigation cannot prove his guilt during the course of 10 days from the day of his arrest. The Central Pediatric Hospital of Baghdad is the face of the current situation in Iraq, when the country is cut off from the world and its center from the rural areas. Built several years ago with Iraq's typical Bronze style, today the hospital looks like a dying island, despite the fact that the number of sick children catastrophically grows. The economic crisis placed doctors of the state clinics into the low-paid category. Many have changed professions. In hospitals, there's a shortage of specialists of all profiles. And regarding the patients, because of the state of war in the country, many get to the capital by foot, traveling at times between 300 and 500 kilometers. Around 100 people enter the admitting ward daily. 10 of them, according to statistics, won't live longer than a week. There's a shortage of the most fundamental medications and agents which used to come from abroad. The domestic factories can't meet the demands of medicine because to produce many medications, simply there is a lack of basic compounds. The main thing the doctors feel is the general emaciation of mothers and infants because of a shortage in diet of meat and milk. 1 liter costs half of an average salary. 1/3 of the infants suffer from atrophied muscles. In despair, not being able to cope, says Dr. Abdelahi Jassin, we periodically turn to UNICEF and the International Red Cross, and some of the very basic needs pass through the borders, but that's very rare, and many illnesses we simply cannot treat. Russia has the 6th largest telecommunications network in the world and the 3rd in Europe. However, given that per every 100 people there are only 17 telephones. Last year, to develop communications, almost $1 billion was spent, but even without specialists' assessment, it's clear that that's insufficient. And currently, the Ministry of Communications of Russia is seeking new forms of receiving investments through creating joint companies, commercial and joint stock companies, counting, of course, on attracting Western partners. However, the exhibit has demonstrated that today Russian firms feel quite confident on markets in providing communication services that's foremost in the area of space. Unlike many other sectors of the domestic industry, in manufacturing of communications means television, radio, broadcasting, the results of conversion are applied most broadly. And at the international exhibit, Communications Expo Com 95, ending in Moscow, one can see concrete examples of cooperation of the companies of the former defense sector with leading telecommunications companies of the world. This is mostly equipment for high-speed digital communication systems, satellite communications, irreplaceable for communications with remote or inaccessible areas, apparatus and systems of mobile radio communications, and many other things. Today, on the birthday of the pioneer organization on Red Square, a triumphant lineup was held, but despite the venue for the function, its organizers told our correspondent that currently the organization is non-partisan and its heads want children to know all of our history and not just one separate part. If you try today to ask an 11-year-old boy in the street, do you know who the pioneers are? In response, at best, you will receive something about the Trubachev troops and comrades and even songs of pioneers. And after a long silence and tension in the historic and literary memory of the contemporary child, in the worst, I don't know, but they do know. Today, on this day significant for them, they again beat their drums and bugled in the lineup, and to the traditional call, "Be ready," they responded, "Always ready." And here in Moscow on Red Square, according to them, they, the current pioneers, are ready to serve the homeland, good and justice, fight for truth. Together we can do something for other people. In almost each Russian city today there are pioneer regiments, teams, fraternities, associations, with all the attributes and even with honorary titles for those especially distinguished, the trumpeter pioneer, for example. The measuring stick of life for them are not the familiar rules which we knew of the young pioneers, which were printed with the multiplication tables on each school notebooks, but commandments close to purely human ones and remotely biblical. Today they don't worship idols or politicians and they don't sing slogans at the fire, but the lineups, routines and insignia ties subordination as is required. Although they wear their ties very rarely now, not to school, because a child in a tie in the contemporary school is a white crow. Incidentally, they get them two ways. Either they're the old ones from mom's or dad's drawer, or they make them themselves. The Trigorka, which in Soviet times produced kilometers of red cloth monthly for 5 years, has stopped doing that. And the factory, which used to cut these kilometers into millions of triangles, long ago cut and sold everything. And therefore, for them, to get a tie is an adventure, a small game within a large one, the pioneer game. Today, it's already gaining popularity for children, as they say themselves, who merely want to do something together. In their opinion, this is what started the pioneer era in the 20s, and everything bad, including the politicizing rising of the pioneer movement, as they feel, adults invented, adding that those adults who in their childhood were not very good pioneers. Boris Yeltsin has decided to spend the two coming weekend days with his family on a brief cruise on the ocean liner. Interfax was told by well-informed sources in Moscow. According to unofficial sources, the president has embarked on the ocean liner Russia touring the channel Moscow-Volga. During the voyage, Boris Yeltsin won't hold any long business meetings. With this, I bid you farewell and also wish that you spend the weekend well. Good evening on Channel 1, the sports news. At the World Handball Championships in Iceland, the Russian team has beat the Swiss team 25-23, thereby has a chance for the Olympic Games in Atlanta. This was information of the last hour, but the most interesting reports came to us through video exchange channels from England. Andrei Konchesky is one of the most successful legionnaires of ours. 2 times he was an English champion within the Manchester United team. On his record this season, there are 14 goals in the championships, and yet now he's in the middle of a scandal. The personality clash between him and the trainer, Alexander Ferguson, is a possible reason Konchesky might leave Manchester. I'll remind you the contract has been signed until 1999, and Ferguson doesn't intend to release the player. However, as the agency Reuters assures, Konchesky is determined to switch to the Glasgow Rangers. The name of the traveling knight, the soccer player Jurgen Klinsmann, as lately is heard more in sports news more than any other before, now because of his triumphant desire to switch to Munich, Bavaria. And now he's been named the best player of the year in England, no matter where he plays, in Stuttgart, Monaco or Tottenham. Klinsberg was the favorite of fans. A more refined player is difficult to imagine. Today in Moscow, the session of the Council of the International Hockey League was held on the mixed system and the International Hockey League Championships. There they decided to hold a separate championship league in the mixed system and an International Hockey League tournament, Intertrust reports. Also, the International Hockey League Council rejected the idea of creating a new Russian Hockey League. And so the International Hockey League Championships will be held from the 5th of September to the 20th of February. First, all 28 teams will play in 2 rounds, the West and the East. Later, the 7 best teams in a 1-round tournament will play for the medals, and all 14 will automatically lead the battle for the Cup. The International Hockey League Championship Cup will be from the 23rd of February to the 10th of April, and beginning with a 1/8 final, the series will last up to 3 victories. And in the National Hockey League, the Pittsburgh Penguins team, after another win over Washington 3-0, entered the quarterfinals of the Stanley Cup, winning in the series of 7 matches 4-3. The score at the 2nd minute of the first period was opened by McIver. At the 16th minute, Ron Francis doubled the result. The 3rd goal ended up in the guest net at the last minute of the match. In the National Basketball Association, in the last matches, the teams won, which have the main contenders for the title of the most useful player of the season, one of the most esteemed in the association. They are Shaquille O'Neal and Admiral David Robinson. But they will be able to decide in the extramural match in the finals. In the 6th match of the 1 quarterfinals, Orlando beat the team of Jordan and Pippen, the Bulls, 108-102, and is in the semifinals of the association. The rival for Orlando may be known tonight in Indianapolis in the match between Indiana and New York. Last year's champion association, Houston, for the 6th time beat Phoenix. The series now is 3-3, and therefore probably the battle is not for life but to the death, and nerves begin to give way, as in Hakeem Olajuwon, who used almost a street brawl device against Kevin Johnson. You'll see it at the end of the broadcast. In the West, San Antonio beat the Lakers 180-88. The score in the series is 4-2, and the Spurs are in the semifinals. But to define the future rival, one more 7th match between Phoenix and Houston will be needed. Other events. In Rome, coming to an end is the major tennis tournament, the last test of readiness before the start on the 29th of May of the main tournament of the season, the Open French Championship. Continuing the ascent to the victory title is Goran Ivanisevic, who took revenge on Andrei Medvedev for defeat in Munich and also on pavement, today easily beating Jeff Taronga. And the basic contender for victory in the tournament is Sergio Bruguera, beating Jonas Bjorkman in 2 sets, and Thomas Muster beat Michael Chang. It's noteworthy in all matches today, only 2 sets were sufficient. In Berlin, the major women's tournament continues. Gabriela Sabatini is still haunted by misfortune. Seeded fourth at the tournament, Sabatini lost to the little-known Nicole Brott and unexpectedly was out, as well was Merly Fernandez. There were no other surprises. All the strongest entered into the next round. He who doesn't risk doesn't drink champagne. Another level of the marathon professional bicycle race, Giro d'Italia, along the roads of the Alpinian Peninsula was won by Maurizio Fondrius. The length of the level was 216 kilometers. The second to finish was the leader in the overall count, Tony Rominger. Eagerly anticipating, are we another round of the Soccer Championships of Russia now? No one can probably complain about the absence of drama in the championships. From this angle, we will view the games of tomorrow's round. And so the Torpedoes of the capital are hosting the Vladikavkaz Spartak. The video report about this game we will make the central subject of tomorrow's edition. Vladikavkaz, after a victory over the champion, have disappointed their fans in the championship semi-final against Rotor, and the Southerners, with vanity, are 2 times more dangerous. For the first time in our broadcast, we plan to show you a soccer report from another city. I have in mind the match in Volgograd, Rotor, which unsuccessfully started against the solid and confident Moscow Lokomotiv, and of course we won't bypass one more Moscow match, the Army and Kamaz. This was the overview of the sports events on Channel 1, but prior to parting, I offer you to take another look at the most outstanding clip, which unfortunately cannot be called romantic. Well, such is sports. It's great and varied.